Hello, everyone. I am ready for history with you on Thursday, March 26th. I'm back inside. I was outside for a little bit today, but now I'm enjoying being back inside. I have enjoyed researching Cleveland. I've done a little bit extra research the last couple days. I'm trying to get ready for this one, and I have actually found some new information that I didn't have before, and that's exciting. I like when that happens, it keeps me interested. So I'm excited to tell you about some of the things that I've learned. First, I need to go back and tell you something I did learn about Arthur. I mentioned a couple lectures ago that I believe that there was a lady who wrote Arthur letters. And I looked that up again, and her name is Julia Sand. And she was a single lady that was homebound. She had health problems most of her life, and she took it upon herself when Garfield was shot to start writing letters to Arthur and to encourage him and basically tell him the truth. She said, the whole country is scared. They're scared because you're going to be president. And what are you going to do? This is your moment. You need to step up. You need to change your habits. You need to change what you've been known to do. And this is your time. She wrote to him multiple times during his presidency, giving pointed and specific advice about what he should do and encouraging him to step up and be the president that she believed he could be. So some historians are starting to give credit to her for possibly the change that they saw in Arthur when it didn't seem explainable any other way. There's no record of him writing her back at all. He did go to see her at her brother's home once, and this correspondence, we don't know much about it and what it meant to him, except that he ordered a lot of his letters to be burned when he died, except for these. These were letters that he did not have burned. So I thought that was interesting. So they must have meant something. And when I learned about this story, it really made me think, wow, I just sit back and I just think, I gripe and complain about maybe decisions or ways that people in the public are behaving, but do I think that I should write them and encourage them? Do I think that my voice would make a difference? Who am I to say that it wouldn't? Possibly it would. Why not write someone that you're thinking about? I've thought about it many times, and unfortunately, I've never acted upon it. You can pray for me that maybe I would be bold enough to do that as I see someone that the Lord is laying on my heart, that I, even in the public view, that I would write and encourage. Okay, now, so that's what I learned about Julia Sand. Now, here is President Cleveland. So we are, I didn't put his number on. I believe we're on 22, right? You should know. So President Cleveland, yes, 22, because he's the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. So he didn't serve back to back. He served 22 and then he was 24. That's why he's on our wall twice and nobody else is. I don't put Abraham Lincoln side by side and he's still only called the 16th president. But this guy is called the 22nd and 24th because he's the only non-consecutive one. So he's 22 and 24. President Cleveland, Democrat. Well, let me put his full name in here. Grover Cleveland. Actually, you want to know his real name? He kind of dropped it when he got older, but his real name, whoops, I need to get out of this. His real name is Stephen. His real name is Stephen Grover Cleveland, but he kind of dropped the Stephen as he got older. Okay, Democrat, 1885 to 1889. That's the first term. His vice president is Thomas Hendricks, and his nickname is Uncle Jumbo. And it was making fun of his size, and it was also the name of the Barnum and Bailey elephant. So I think this name was used mostly by friends and family. Kind of weird, but I think it was. And he didn't from one thing I read said that he actually didn't mind it. He took it in fun. Okay, so he was single. He went into the White House with no first lady, well, no wife, and so his sister Rose accompanied him. Rose Cleveland served as the hostess because he was single. She was probably one of the most educated first ladies that we ever had. Very educated. She was a teacher at a pretty prestigious girls' school before she went. She wrote several books. She's the only first lady to have written a book while she was in the White House. So she did write a book. It was about some poet, very, very smart book, it would be a book a literary person would want to read. It was said that when she got bored of shaking hands and she tired of this kind of social aspect, that in her head she was conjugating Greek verbs. Just shows how smart she was. And a lot of people had a difficult time kind of relating to her and talking to her that came to the White House at first. And I think she came across really strong at first and wanted to kind of tell people what to do and tell them how strong women were and how smart we were. I think as a little bit of time went by, I think she cooled off a little bit on that. I think she got a little bit easier to talk to, and a little bit she started to realize how to do this thing. But she was a big supporter of women's rights, and wanted women voting, all kinds of things. Now, it's interesting to think maybe she could have had a say in that, but the women don't get the vote till 1919, so she doesn't have any immediate influence on that anyway. Okay, and then he gets married on June 2nd, 1886, while he is president. Now, he's not the only one, okay? We've talked about Tyler already, who married, and then we will see Wilson remarries when he's president, but he is the only one to get married in the White House. They did get married in the White House mainly because it was the only way to keep it private. They kept it very, very small. We'll get to that in a second. So the new First Lady is Frances Folsom. And Frances Folsom, her dad was a very good friend of Cleveland's, and he died when she was only 11 years old. And from that point on, Cleveland kind of helped her family as she grew up. He helped support her, helped her go to college. I think he kind of helped with some of their organizing some of their finances and different things. And when she finished college, he asked her to marry him. There was all of these rumors going on in Washington that he was going to get married, and this family, she and her mom, had been at the White House. And guess what all the rumors were? That he was going to marry the mom, not her. And then they surprised everyone by it being the two of them that were married. So, yes, there was an age difference. But all reports say that they had a very happy marriage. They wound up having several children. I'll show you some pictures in a minute. And he was very kind to her, and I think she was good for him. They were married in the White House in a private ceremony. I think there was only about 30 people there. They kept it really small, really simple. He started to be very particular about his privacy and got angry at the press on several instances when they just seemed to be too snoopy. And you can imagine why. I mean, it would be hard to be basically under a microscope all of the time. I think Eleanor Roosevelt referred to it as living in a fishbowl. So, like, people could just watch you all the time, like you just sit and can watch the fish. That's how she felt in the White House. Okay, so here's a little bit about Frances. And by the way, I didn't put this on here, but they called her Frank. Her family and President Cleveland called her Frank. That was her nickname. She was one of the most loved first ladies since Dolly Madison. They loved her. Now, you do not have to write this quote that I have here, but I wanted to put it up here for you to see and me to remind you to tell you. Ike Hoover was one of the workers in the White House for many, many presidencies. He was I think the correct word is the steward, and he was in charge of a lot of the background stuff, the servants and the running of the household and that kind of thing. And he said of her, "No more brilliant and affable meaning friendly, lady than Mrs. Cleveland has ever graced the portals of this old mansion." I love that. And I told you that I was reading the book by Margaret Truman about the White House. Margaret Truman, as a young lady, actually met Frances as an older lady and said that no wonder she was so well loved. So she must have just been just a just a kind person full of grace. I can just imagine that she was just, I don't know, that's how I imagine her, almost just like floating into the room and floating out. At 22, she was the youngest first lady, okay? And she hosted 2 receptions a week, one on Saturday. Why one on Saturday? Most of the receptions, all the other first ladies, this was a time where the White House was just open to the public. So when I say reception, people could come in, shake your hand, get a cup of tea or whatever, and then leave, okay? Um, most of the first ladies held these during the week because these were governors' wives, senators' wives, people who were more elevated in society, the Washington socialites, okay? And they came on a weekday, like a Tuesday afternoon or a Monday morning. But Frances started holding 2 receptions, one on the weekdays and one on Saturdays. Why? So that working women could come. And one person in Washington complained to her one time and said, "Do you know what you're doing? You're allowing these people." And she's like, "Oh, so I'm allowing people that work to come?" And he was like, "Yes." And she was like, "Exactly. You got it. Bingo. You're smarty." Okay, yes, I want the shopkeepers to come. I want the ones who never thought that they could come before to come. And then when they left the White House after the first term, so the first term was over and she's leaving, she tells the butler to take care of the place. And he was like, "What do you mean?" So, "Because we're going to be back." Well, he says, "Well, when can I expect you back?" I guess thinking that she's going to go for a visit. And she said, "Well, we'll be back in 4 years." And she was. Okay, now, after that first term, when they went back to their home, their first child was born during President Harrison's term, and her name was Ruth. And the whole country loved baby Ruth. And guess what? They named a candy bar after her. Many people think that baby Ruth is named for Babe Ruth, but that's actually not true. It was named for baby Ruth, Cleveland's daughter. He was the first president to have a child in the White House, so not Ruth, but their second daughter when they came back. Remember, 2 terms split up with Harrison in the middle. Esther was born during their second term. Interesting, right? Ruth and Esther, both women, books of the Bible. His dad, I'll get to this in just a second, but his dad was a Presbyterian minister, so that might be part of the reason for that. When they left after the second term, so I'm giving you a little bit more about her full time. When they left after her second term, she cried. She was so upset, and many of the employees cried because they loved her so much. She was kind. She often looked out for them in ways like giving them birthday gifts and Christmas gifts. She got to know the staff of the White House, not just like, "Will you do this for me, do this, do this." She got to know them on a personal level, which tells us some about her. After the White House, I'm going to tell you a little bit. I didn't write this down, but after they finished in the White House, they moved to a house in Princeton, New Jersey, which is where the college is. And they lived there. They became friends with a lot of the professors, with a lot of the students. She had her home always open for the students. They loved to come in and visit with Miss Cleveland, and how many of them talked about how friendly she was and how much they enjoyed that. He died when he died in 1908, and she remarried a few years later a professor from Princeton in 1913. So she stayed in that area and kept her connections with a lot of the professors and the students. They did wind up, I must not have put this on here, but they wound up having 5 children total. One died the first one, Ruth, died when she was about 12 of, I'll have to look it up. I think I read diphtheria, but she died, and Cleveland was brokenhearted. And I read that he was mad at God for a while about this, and he really had to come to terms with the fact that she was with God. And he finally did, I believe, and made peace about that. Okay, so this is a little bit about him. His father was a minister, and he received some education and was getting ready to go to college, but his dad died when Cleveland was only 16. And so when his dad died, that kind of forced him not to be able to go on to college like he wanted, but he went to work. And at first, he was going to do a couple different things, and he wound up going to where his brother was at a school for the blind for 1 or 2 years. Remember, your different sources are going to say different things. So I put 2 years, but I'm not really sure exactly how long. But now this is the cool thing I learned. He befriended a hymn writer named Fanny Crosby. Fanny Crosby wrote many, many hymns. If you have a hymnal in your house, go to the back and look up her name in the author section, and you will find a ton of hymns written by her. And she was a blind lady that also worked at this school. One of the songs is Blessed Assurance. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. Okay, so she has many, many well-known songs. And he copied down some poems for her, and he became a friend of hers. When he first came to work there, he was a young guy, 16, 17, and his brother went in to Fanny and said, I need you to go in a few times and just check on, I don't know if he was called Stephen at that time, but Stephen, Grover, whomever, and just check on him and talk to him. And she did, and they developed a friendship. And even after he left the school, they continued to correspond and talk to each other. She met his wife. She, in her biography, it said that she sat with his babies on her lap, and so they continued to have a relationship. So I think that's interesting. That also encourages me a little bit about his faith, because Fanny Crosby's faith was so strong and unwavering. Her hymns are absolutely beautiful, talking about the dependency of Jesus. And I have no doubt that she could not have been friends with him without talking about Jesus. And if I wonder how much of that they shared in common. Even though I read that he didn't necessarily continue to go to church his whole entire life, his belief still stayed. So he still had a belief in God and the original faith that he grew up with, I believe. So that gives me some confidence. He moved to Buffalo, New York, after his time at the school. He eventually wound up in Buffalo, where he served as a sheriff. Everyone was pleased at the job that he did as sheriff in Erie County. And then he was elected mayor in Buffalo, and then eventually became the governor of New York. And he earned a reputation for being honest and hardworking. You could trust him. He wasn't corrupt. He was going to try to get rid of the corruption. He was going to try to do the very best he could, and he was going to work hard at it. And one name for him that I saw that they called him at the time was Ugly Honest. And I thought that was really interesting, that And that wasn't talking about his looks. It was talking about that he was willing to be honest to the point that sometimes it seemed ugly. It seemed ugly or mean, but he was ugly honest. He was going to tell you the truth, and he was going to do what was right. And that even carried on into the White House. All of the 4 or 5 books that I had at my feet studying about him all kept saying the same thing, that he could be trusted and that he tried to do his job very, very well and do it according to the principles that he felt were important. Okay, so as president, so here's some of the more personal things about him as president. He was the first Democrat since the Civil War. So since the Democrats were the party of the South, so since the Civil War, we have just Republican, 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 Republican. Now here's the first Democrat. He believed in a very hands-off government. So he believed that the people, that he was basically the protector of the people, that he was not going to enact all of these different things to interfere with their lives. He believed that his job as president was to protect their rights and protect the government and basically protect the money of the government. He wanted to make sure it was used well. He wanted to, he was the protector. That's what he felt his job was. Another nickname for him was the guardian president. He felt like he was a guard dog, basically. And so he used his veto 584 times. It was double all of the presidents before him combined, because he felt like his job was to guard the people from unnecessary bills and legislation. If he saw something come across and he thought it was money that wasn't necessarily necessary, he vetoed it. And what he was doing was also restoring power to a presidency that had gotten its power taken away from it. Before him, look at who we have. We have Grant. We have Johnson, who's completely like dethroned during his presidency almost. That they try to take all power away from him, try to impeach him. Then you have Grant, who basically gives his power to other people that create all of these scandals and all of these problems, and he's just seen as someone not managing the affairs very well. Then you have Grant, who's not in there very long. Not Grant, sorry. You have Garfield. Okay, Hayes, right? Grant and Hayes. Let me keep myself straight. Hayes, who seems a little bit more hands-off also. And then you have Garfield, who's assassinated. And then Arthur. So you have Congress becoming very, very, very strong. And the president becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. Well, Cleveland kind of switches that around. He shows that the president does have power. And in his second term shows some strength in some ways that the public did not like, and in some ways that worked against him. But we'll see that a little bit later. He was very, very hardworking. And I think this is interesting. For someone who wasn't like passing a lot of bills and making a lot of laws, he was vetoing more than he was doing anything. He was still hardworking, because what he was doing was he was being hard at work to guard the people. Congress could overrun him with things that he did not want passed, and he wanted to protect the people. He didn't feel like the government should be giving a lot to the people, and he wanted to protect them. He wanted to protect the budget. He did his own paperwork. He many times was still at his desk past midnight, 1 or 2 in the morning, and up early again the next day. He worked on his wedding day until they came to get him. He was at his desk that morning. He got rid of a lot of luxuries. The presidential yacht, he said it was not a necessity, and he got rid of it. He did not want that expense coming out of the American people's money. And I thought this was funny. He preferred plain food. He said, I would rather just have, just my plain chop than go downstairs and eat that French stuff that's going to be down there. He was just a plain kind of person, clear spoken, um, just honest. I guess the phrase is now what you see is what you get. And he saw himself a lot, kind of like Jackson, like a man of the people. Like he wasn't trying to be something he wasn't. But if he was president and the people trusted him to be president, he was going to do his job well. During his second term, this is kind of interesting. This is kind of a little bit of a conspiracy. He had a secret surgery during his second term on a ship. It was said that he was going on like vacation, and he went on this ship, and it was actually to remove a tumor that was in his mouth. So they did surgery on his mouth, removed part of his jaw, and then he went to recover in a vacation place, and it was just said in the papers that he was vacationing, and practiced speaking with an artificial jaw for that whole time so that it wouldn't be apparent that he had had this surgery. And you think, well, wait a minute, you said you've just spent this whole time telling me how honest he was. Isn't that dishonest to not tell the people what he was doing? Well, in some ways, yes, probably, because he didn't come out right out and say it. But one, it's a personal thing, it's your health, and some people would say, well, as president, you should disclose your health, right? You should tell everybody the truth so that they know. Here's the second reason. There was a depression going on at the time, second only to the Great Depression. It was a big depression, and the economy was so unstable that he was afraid that if he was honest about what he was going for and told them about this tumor that was found, that people would panic and that it would cause even more harm to the economy. So it was kept a secret, and it didn't even come out until after his death that the secret was out about why he was actually on that ship. But it was to not worry the public. Here's the picture I promised you about. That's Francis and him and his 4 remaining children. Ruth is not in this picture because she died shortly before this picture was taken. I hope that gives you a good idea about who we're seeing. We're going to see him again. We're going to see some things that are going to go on during his presidency in the next lecture, and then we'll see him again. Not very many more personal things because we've covered that in this one. But he's an interesting one. I encourage you, do some more research. Get on those sites I told you about. See if you can find anything extra. Look in those books that you took home. And tell me what you think. Okay? In the comments, I want you to tell me something. I want you to put your opinion down in the comments. We're going to talk about this idea of hands-off or very active government. He felt like he was the guard, okay? Instead of maybe what would be the opposite? Maybe the involver or the organizer or the trying to figure things out for you. He was more of the guard. He was trying to protect your rights, okay, rather than give you a whole bunch of things or change a lot of things. He wanted to protect what you already had. I want you to tell me what you think about him vetoing so many times. So tell me if you think a president should be vetoing this much, or if, because Congress votes for it, he should sign it, because all of those people, it went through it went through Senate and House of Representatives. They all voted for it. It came to him. Should he not just sign it because they passed it? Give a little sentence or two about your opinion, even if you're unsure. Just say, well, I think he should, but I'm not sure. Or maybe ask a question about, not about him personally. You can look that up on your own, about this idea of government, if you're still confused about what I mean. But put a comment in there about what you think would be best. Do you think a president should veto this much? Or do you think he should be signing more? That's what I want you to think about.